How can you manage your ADHD at work? How can you help those in your organization with ADHD to excel? What are some of the strategies involved in allowing your ADHD superpowers to flourish? I spoke with Theo Smith about these questions and much more, but before we go any further, hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell as well to make sure that you don't miss out on any future content. Theo Smith is an award-winning author, speaker, consultant, and the host of a podcast. He recently co-authored the 2022 Business Book Awards winning Neurodiversity at Work. It's a guide on how to drive innovation, performance, and productivity with a neurodiverse workforce. Theo shares some frankly inspiring insights on the experience of ADHD, how to manage it, and how to be empowered in your ADHD in the workplace. Because it seems to me that you've been very fervent and interested in trying to be involved in recruiting talent, but also creating environments that really allows that talent to flourish. And obviously you've co-authored a book, Neurodiversity at Work, which I'm really keen for you to speak about as well. But it seems to me that you're really on a sense of mission around this. And I was very keen and curious to ask you about, well, where did the sense of mission really begin for you? What triggered it?
Well, way back when I was 21, I bombed out of school, bombed out of college, managed to fail the whole thing. But I still had a belief that you could go to university, you could continue on in education, because both my mum and dad, came from a poor background and still went to university when I was a kid. So I had the belief system it was never too late to go and to continue your academic journey. But for me, it was acting, right? Because that's what my mum got me involved in, to get me off the streets, to get me focused, to stop me getting in so much trouble. Like, we'll get him in acting and we'll get him doing music and art, and that might, help him. And it did, right? It did, because it gave me some focus and it gave me some belief in myself. But when I went into university, I found out I was dyslexic within the first weeks of being there. And that's where the first piece came. But it wasn't until about 15 years later that, as a recruitment leader, I sat in a room full of other recruitment leaders, heads of talent acquisition for IBM and for all of the interesting global organizations, of really fascinating people. And somebody stood up in front of us and talked about the concept of neurodiversity. And I went, boom, oh, that's me. They're talking about me. And then all of this realization, some stuff that had been going on in my head, that I wasn't just dyslexic, right? There was a lot more going on in my head than I first realized. And at the same point, I was going on a journey with my daughter around some of the challenges she was facing at about 4 years of age, 5 years of age, and that transition into the beginning of education. And there was a looking in the mirror to realize that my daughter's experiences were kind of reflected in my own experiences, but I was able to intervene. So it was like, no, I'm not going to let the car crash. I'm gonna make sure that the individual in that car is protected. But that is kind of the real life experience of what happened and how it came to be, that I thought, I've got to do something about this, because I'm not the only person who's gone through this, and therefore I can make a difference from a recruitment and HR perspective.
I'm really keen to ask as well, actually, about, so when you sort of think about, I guess, the main challenges that people with ADHD actually experience in that work context, and some of the measures that can be introduced to actually enable people in that space, what would you say are the main challenges in a work context that people encounter on a day-to-day basis with ADHD?
Wow. So one of the biggest challenges is this trauma. And I say trauma because that's what happens, right? When you face particular challenges in life, again, they become traumatic. And it may be like a drip effect day by day. So you may not see them as traumatic when you first look at them. But if you consider somebody having to be quiet all the time in class, right? High energy, high level of intellect, want to communicate with lots of people and share their ideas and concepts, but they're constantly being told to shut up and sit down. They're also then trying to use up that energy, and I see this all the time in young people. They want to use up that energy, but because they're disruptive in the classroom, because they're being told sit down, which is not natural to the way they want to be potentially, right? Sit down, shut up, do as you're told. And then when they don't, because energy levels are exploding, or the energy levels within the brain, it doesn't have to be physical energy, because it depends how it works within your own system, then what happens is you get told, right, you're going to stay in lunchtime and you're going to sit outside the headmaster's class because you've been naughty. You weren't listening to what I was telling you. You weren't shutting up when I told you to shut up. And then that person who's got a huge amount of energy that they need to release gets the opposite. They have to go and sit outside the headmaster's classroom, right, at lunchtime. So then they go back into classroom, even worse, because more of that energy is not being used. And so this happens right at the beginning in the education system, and then we take it through into the workplace, right? So these trauma, these triggers, they then can be explosive. So what might happen is a manager might treat you in a way that triggers something that happened to you when you were a child, asking you to sit down and shut up in a meeting, for example. And that triggers something. It's either a fight or flight response, I find, which is you either tell the manager where to go, and then the manager's obviously clearly not happy because you've shown them up in front of everybody in a meeting, or you go into yourself and you no longer communicate and engage within that environment. Now, both have a huge negative detrimental impact on you, the environment, the individuals in that environment, the team, right? Because both are not healthy and helpful in that given situation. Now, you can put that in any context. It's the same with being dyslexic and being asked to get up and write on the blackboard all the time, or get asked to read, right? When you can't, you struggle. Every single time you do that, you feel less than. And then in a work environment or as part of an interview, you get asked to write on a whiteboard. That triggers me. I can't spell. I can't write properly. Like, and you're asking me to do that, which immediately makes me feel less of a human being. So these are all the types of things, the trauma that happened in school, in the playground or at home or whatever else, and then it gets fed into your life and into the work systems and processes. The manager doesn't know what to trigger. You may not even know what to trigger because depending on your background and experiences, you may not have the diagnosis. So you don't have the label. So therefore, even you in that environment don't understand why you're fighting out or why you're running away every time somebody asks you to do something. So that's one of the biggest challenges. Lack of individual understanding about oneself, the way our brains work, energy levels, what gives us energy, what takes energy away, and then managers and co-workers having an understanding of what's going on with those triggers.
I don't know why, but it's an aspect that I never really considered about the actual experience of ADHD is the mental health aspect and the level of trauma that someone will have encountered in navigating life without having a diagnosis, especially not being able to really understand some of the challenges or why they're experiencing some of the challenges that they're experiencing. What are some of the ways in which people can begin to, I guess, rebuild from that space in terms of being able to kind of rebuild self-esteem and understand the value that they actually have to contribute, whether at work or wherever else?
They need to start to think around what impacts them positively. And that is really, that's not easy, right? Because what you've got is you've got kind of the ADHD brain constantly craving, different things depend on the brain, right? But it may be craving to do something, to keep busy, to engage, to talk. But that in itself, that craving it and doing it can be exhaustive in itself. So you can find yourself burning out all the time. So you find a high level of entrepreneurs ADHD, right? Because they have the energy to keep going, to hyper-focus, especially if they're passionate about something. But they also can find they burn out quite a bit in the early stages of developing that business process and the ideas. And you also find a lot of self-medication. But what a lot of people don't understand is how to get the balance. And that balance will also come from nutrition. It will come from exercise. It will come from finding opportunities to let the brain move away from one task into another. So if you can start to understand what gives you energy, what doesn't, what you should eat before you go to bed, what you shouldn't eat, whether or not you want to fast intermittently to help with energy levels and the recovery of the system, your body, like all of these things are really important because what you could be doing is self-medicating on a number of things with coffee, with drink, with drugs, and also then missing out on food and nutrition that would be really helpful to you because you're swapping it with other things that then mean you're not hungry. One of the challenges around ADHD brains is being able to focus, which is funny, right? Because the other thing is hyper-focus.
You mentioned something there in your answer. You was talking about balance. And I guess a lot of the time when people are thinking about ADHD, okay, you hear the words deficit, you hear the words disorder. We're used to sort of thinking about the challenges and thinking about the problems around it. But one of the things I really enjoy about, well, your podcast, for example, I mean, it's called what, Neurodiversity, kind of helping people eliminate the kryptonite to discover the superpower, I guess, or the superhero within, in a sense. What are some of those ADHD strengths that are really common amongst those who actually experience ADHD? You've mentioned the creativity. Like, what are some of the ones that's really perhaps underutilized or underappreciated in how people think about ADHD?
Yeah, so I think the hyper focus is a really interesting one. So if you get somebody with ADHD to focus on the thing they're really interested in and passionate about, and you see this across neurodiversity more broadly, but if you can get them along that track and give them the support to focus on that and eliminate some of the distractions, they theoretically could spend 12 hours straight working on it. And it doesn't just work in their work role, it can work in any area. So I can find myself out in the garden. If I go out and I'm doing gardening and I know what I want to do, or painting, I can literally go. And you find this in athletes in sports. That's why ADHD athletes are the best in the world. But that doesn't mean everybody with ADHD is an athlete. I'm not, right? Because something about the body and the way that's made also has an impact. But certainly from the mind being hyperactive, right, can be really positive. And the level of creativity and ideas you get from an ADHD mind, what happens is often a lot of people with ADHD are processing a huge amount of information. They're not just taking in what you're saying to them, they're taking in all the other things going around to them. They might have like this extra kind of ability. And this is where I kind of think, wow, these feel like some kind of superpowers. They're not really in a sense, we're just more connected to other things that are going on around us. However, the challenge to that is you can't ask somebody to be aware of all these different things that are going on around them and then say, now you need to remember the last 3 things I've just told you. It's really difficult because that person may not have been completely tuned in just to the 3 things that you were mentioning to them because of everything that's going on. So what it means is you've got this brain that can see the forest really clearly, but they may really struggle to see the trees. So that's what you've got to understand. Highly creative, can be highly adaptive to change, can see things that other people don't see, and can find answers to problems that other people just couldn't get to. The ADHD brain just comes with so much energy and insight. You've just got to be able to facilitate them to be able to run on that track.
There's so many misconceptions out there about ADHD, so many myths. I don't know whether either in your work or indeed with the people that you work with, like what would you, if there was maybe 3 misconceptions or 3 myths that you was choosing that have been most problematic, most troublesome, what would they be?
I think there's always a kind of an idea and a link that ADHD equals problem. The reality is the stats possibly don't lie in that area because you know, a high proportion, they reckon 1 in 3 prisoners are ADHD. But the reality is that people with ADHD or people with ADHD are not, you know, they're not troublemakers and want to end up in prison. But if they're from a low socioeconomic background and they've got limited opportunities and chances in life, then they're going to find a way to channel that energy. But equally, they reckon around 50% of entrepreneurs at ADHD, and they reckon about similar amount of self-made millionaires, 60% or something. So, I mean, all of these stats, you know, we can weigh them up. The reality is there's some truth in this. And it comes back to, again, that hyper-focus, the energy, the willingness not to give up, right, when you get on that track. And so that, I think that's one of the big misconceptions, that you can look at data and think too many people do X, therefore they're this, when in reality is that's what they're having to do based on the situation that's been provided to them, which comes back to that kryptonite. Other people put kryptonite in front of us, right? And then we allow it and we accept it. And that's one of the biggest issues. And we don't know it. So we're like, I just accept that I'm surrounded in this kryptonite because that's my life and that's what I do. So I live and I deal with what I've got in front of me. But actually, we could just shift that out of the way and move it. And we can shift it out of the way for other people as well. The other thing is that somebody with ADHD is just too difficult to manage and deal with because they may be quite talkative, they may be quite energetic, They may be quite opinionated and they may be quite hyper-focused to drive and deliver things. But actually, again, that's not the case. You've often got very caring, considerate individuals, but they've just got a lot of energy. If you can find a way to channel that energy, you've got incredible power, right? I think the biggest issue for people with ADHD is not how others perceive them, but how they end up perceiving themselves because of a long period of stigma, trauma. Then there's a level of acceptance that this is my life and this is what I have, and that's it, which isn't the case.
I don't know if there are any examples in which you've come across where you see businesses, organizations, what have you, actually doing it well, where they're providing the right kind of context or space or the right kind of leadership, whatever the case might be, which enables people to actually access the full measure of their potential. Have you seen that?
Where for example, tech startups and scale-ups are starting to think about this a bit more. And what they're realizing is when they survey their workforce, they're more neurodiverse than they ever could have imagined. You know, I've talked to organizations where 60% of their workforce are neurodiverse in one shape or form, associated often with either ADHD, dyslexia, or autism, or a combination of. And the management team is even more neurodivergent. Neurodiverse is further, like 70%. And that organization is immediately like, whoa, it's not a case of we need to think about how we bring people in. It's a case of how do we continue to harness the incredible talent we've already got. Where individuals and organizations struggle is as they scale even further, systems, processes, management structures, and job roles change significantly and very, very quickly, especially when you get Series A, Series B, Series C of funding. And then what you can get is somebody with ADHD who may have been performing really well in a sales job or in a tech role, whatever it is, all of a sudden changing manager, leadership structure, changing function, or their role is slimmed down or opened up, whatever, all of a sudden that individual really, really struggles. And then they're like, whoa, this person with ADHD who was fine, who was flying, all of a sudden they become really argumentative and really difficult and really disruptive. So I think the organizations that are doing well are kind of planning that journey to think about, like, we want to take these people with us because they're high performing, high energy, they're knocking stuff out of the park. But if we don't start to consider their mental health, their well-being, and how they're going to be impacted by changes in the organizational structure, people management, if we don't think about that now in the early stages of growth, we're gonna hit a problem.
What's your vision for what this can ultimately look like? You know, as you say, we're in the beginning stages of this at the moment, but how far are we on the journey? Where do you feel like we can arrive at? What kind of measures would be commonplace in businesses and in organizations when we're doing this well?
So I don't say this lightly. I truly believe this. Neurodiversity reflects biodiversity, right? They mirror one another. So the reality is, without bees, the planet is at risk. We see there's a lack of bees. That ultimately ends in the destruction of this planet, right? There's no other way to describe it than that. And we see the warning signs. If we reduce the amount of neurological variation within our organizations, within politics, within our ecosystem, because it's interlinked, right? We are on this planet. We are engaged in the ecosystem. If we take out neurological variation, we put the planet at further risk, because some of the greatest minds in the history of this planet that have solved some of the most complex problems, when we talk about creating things like Edison, or we talk about challenging the status quo today, the types of people who are going, no, I don't believe what you're telling me, the rhetoric, what politicians, we need to do more today. These are neurodiverse minds. These are people who are autistic and ADHD. The people pushing the boundaries. But we got a problem, because these people are in our prisons rather than in our education systems, and rather than in our employment systems. These people are on the periphery often and are struggling to get in. They're not being treated well. They're dealing with trauma. They're dealing with drug issues, with drink challenges. There's all these problems that we've got around it because we're starting to segregate people from society. However, the upshot is we're going through a huge global transformation in terms of technology and innovation, and the types of organizations that are coming through and where we're going to is flipping it. So it's, you know, it's starting to move the other direction. And that's what I see organizations, as I mentioned before, can start to go, not what is it just today, but where are we going in the next 3 to 5 years? And how we can ensure that we've got enough variety, neurological variety within our organizations, not just in terms of development of technology, systems, processes, looking after our people, but giving back to our children, our children's children, but also to our customers, because our customers are neurodivergent, neurodiverse as well, right? So if we don't think about that in terms of the technology we develop and the processes for our customers, at some point, they're going to opt out. And Gen Z and the young generations coming through are hypercritical over what is your value, what's your purpose, what are you giving back? So this is where I see organizations can start to measure where they are today, and I guarantee you it won't be far enough to think about, right, how we can ensure we move the dial and move it rapidly, because that's how quickly the world is changing.
Theo, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It's been incredibly educational and also inspiring as well. So thank you very, very much for that. I'm so grateful for the conversation, and hopefully we'll get to speak again at some point as well in the future too. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Let me know in the comments. And as ever, subscribe, like the video, hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on future content, and I will see you soon.